2, 2. You should be able to hear it coming through your laptop as well. 2, 2, 2. Audio check, 1, 2. Audio check, 1, 2.
Testing left. Testing lectern for live stream. Lectern 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Testing lectern for live stream. You got it? Cool.
copied them all onto one stick. So I'll get Scott's ready. Do yours at the end.
Are we ready? Thanks, everyone. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Kyneton Theatre night. My name is Bill Johnston. I'm the newly appointed Operations Manager, District 2, and it is my absolute privilege to be here tonight. I guess as your host, I want to thank you all for your attendance, and I believe we're going out live as I speak, and I want to thank everyone who's watching this via the miracles of modern technology. Before we continue, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Jar Jar Wurrung, who are the traditional owners of the land on which we are gathered, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present. That said, I'll make a reappearance later in the evening. I'm now going to hand over to your Master of Ceremonies, Andy Waterson, Ops Officer Waterson, who I know many of you are familiar with, and Andy will take us through the rest of the evening. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thanks everybody for your time out tonight. Some of the themes that the Chief Officer has just sent through should have been mailed out just in the last week via the OM through the catchment teams. So the Chief Officer's put out his expectations for the fire season, and I know that the brigades are well and truly into that preparedness. So tonight, some of the themes and some of the speakers that we've been able to get start with our new Regional Commander, Scott Purdy, who's taken over from Mark Gilmore, who most in the room would know. So it's great to welcome Scott tonight. He's going to talk about the line of control and how his job, Bill's job, supports us out on the fire ground. So tonight we know is about our fire ground commanders, crew leader, sector commanders, group personnel, how we can support you, how the region supports you. So there's a hell of a lot of work goes into a preparedness day, and Scott's probably clocked up, I'd hate to think, on his new car, getting around the Loddon Mallee region. So Scott's going to talk about how the region works, how it supports the fire ground. We've also got some updated information on community warnings. So we've got Beth, and we've also got the crazy vet, Greg McIntyre. So thanks guys for coming in. Amy was going to talk tonight, but she's been called away to assist in the fires in Gippsland. We've also got, or been lucky enough to secure Les Veering from Delb, who's going to talk about the hazardous trees, and that's a hot topic. So again, one of the Chief Officer's expectations. Adam Damon from, well, he's one of our own. He's going to talk about PDD, changes in aircraft for the upcoming fire season. And then again, luckily, we've got the new OM, Bill Johnson, here, who's going to give his briefing and expectations for the fire season. We had planned to leave questions till the end. Are you happy with that, guys, as presenters? So we're also going to take questions from the broad audience out within District 2 who are streaming in live. So thanks, Michelle, for organising that. So I'd like you to welcome our first speaker, Operations Manager Scott Purdy.
Thanks, Andy, and to reiterate Bill's opening and Andy's message as well, thank you for the invite, and thank you to see so many people here tonight and interested and committed to what we do, which is critical work to support the community. Andy's asked me to come along tonight and talk about what goes on at the regional level, what's the emergency management frameworks, and there's a lot of people and departments and agencies that get together to do a whole lot of stuff around emergency response activities, which in some cases may seem so far removed from what you guys are doing out there on the front line. there can be daylight between. But our job is ultimately to support those frontline activities and to ensure that we have in layman's terms, a whole of government response to support the community and especially supporting the community through managing the impacts and consequences that are imposed on them by whatever that emergency may be. So, as a regional commander, we're divided up into. There we go. So the emergency management arrangements, I won't bore you with the detail, but in layman's sense, the framework through the state is set up at 3 levels. There's a state tier, obviously, which Craig Lapsley, as I'm sure many know, leads most things emergency management in the state. Then it comes down to a regional tier, and there's 8 regions within the emergency management framework, and that's why we still refer to a Loddon Mallee region, even though CFA's moved to a northwest region. And they're whole of government regions, so it's about bringing all the government agencies and departments together. So that's why there's 8, and we still practice through that. And then at the local level, in a response phase, we call it incident, and in the other phases of planning and exercising and prevention work, etc., it's obviously done at municipal level, so municipal region, state in that sense. When we talk emergency management and my work, it's not focused on fire. Fire is only a small component of it. It is truly all hazards. So I find myself in forums talking about issues in agriculture, energy supply, public health issues, all sorts of other things that may not have anything directly to do with CFA and a fire service, but that's the way the emergency management frameworks operate. So 70% of my time is spent doing external work to CFA and probably only 30% back internally. All hazards, 3 classes. I won't bore you with it, but class 1 stuff, if you do hear of it, is the traditional fire, SES, flood, storm type events. Class 2 is everything else bundled together, and class 3 is really counter-terrorism and the areas the Victoria Police look after. So that's how it's divided up into the frameworks and the legislation that gives different powers and responsibilities to different people. So without boring the framework, I'll go into probably a role that you do here, and that of the regional controller. So I'm one of the Muppets that fills this role as a regional controller who makes those calls about how ICCs operate, for example, so Gisborne, down this neck of the woods. So who made the decision to put that up today or not put staffing in there today? That's what the regional controller does. So up there's a few dot points. I won't run through them all specifically about what is the responsibility of the regional controller. But essentially, the RC is responsible for our whole readiness to likely emergencies and response to emergencies in a major emergency sense. So not the day-to-day business, not the car accidents, not the rubbish bin fires, not the house fires, but the events that are likely to or may turn into major emergencies. And there's all sorts of definitions that sit behind that. And obviously you see that applied mostly through incident control centres, the 40 odd through the state. And in Loddon Mallee we obviously have Gisborne, Epsom and Mildura or Irimple, ICCs as level 3 incident control centres. So how they operate, when they're triggered, when incidents transfer into the line of control as we talk about into one of those centres, that's what the regional controller is responsible for. There's a whole lot of other responsibilities there in terms of integrating relief and recovery activities and controlling an REMT, but that sits with the RC. It's also agency blind, so it's important to remember. So as the regional controller, you've got powers over other agencies, so it's almost, you don't wear your uniform, you're almost there as the agent. The simplest way of explaining it is you're Craig Lapsley's agent in the field. So it's agency blind type work. So it might be an MFB regional controller that's directing CFA resources, etc., etc. Where are we? So a couple of important functions about how does this all work. 2 teams that the regional controller leads, the regional control team and the regional emergency management team. So I'll start with the regional control team. It essentially is a group of agency representatives that come together to support the regional controller in the execution of their duties. So typically what we would see would be, forgetting which agency the regional controller is, you would have a CFA representative there, the regional agency commander, DELP will be there, SES will be there, Digital will be there, Victoria Police will be there, ambulance is the health commander, you'll have a DHHS, which is the government department responsible for relief and recovery. They will also be there. So it's a group of government agencies that come together to form the regional control team that together make decisions and provide direction to agencies about how we should prepare ourselves for elevated risk or the likelihood of major emergencies coming on, or in the times of we've actually got incidents in a landscape, how we're actually ensuring effective control is there. And as well as trying to support the incident control teams and provide direction to them, we're also feeding the beast in Melbourne with all the information and demands that they put on it. So one of the big jobs is being the filter to ensure that people in town aren't ringing people out in the field on their mobile phone to find out what's going on and provide direction and everything else. So we do play that filter role to ensure that there is timely information passed up and down the chain. And at times it can be challenging to be an effective filter, I can assure you. The Regional Emergency Management Team is no different in concept to what you would know as an incident level EMT that you would have at any incident that you go to on a daily basis. And on the side of the road would normally consist of your senior Victoria Police member, your ambulance paramedic, your SES commander, whatever the case may be. It's that same concept except on a much, much bigger scale. So every government department, agency, municipality, in some cases community groups are part of the Regional Emergency Management Team. And it's really charged with, as I alluded to earlier, providing a whole of government response to the community. So managing the consequences and impacts of a fire or an event, both in the response phase and afterwards. So it's that whole transition from providing relief centres and supporting the community that have been displaced through evacuations or otherwise, through to how do we do the recovery with grants to businesses through economic impact, or whether it be agricultural impact, etc., etc. So it's a broad mandate. It's the same concept used regardless of what the emergency is, whether it's a fire, whether it's a flood, whether it's an outbreak of anthrax, whatever the case may be. These same teams come together to manage and respond to it. So it is trying to pull together the whole of the public sector, if you like, to effectively mitigate the impacts of those incidents. So if you think about a relatively small fire, so a telephone exchange catches fire and becomes inoperable, you know, for the fire brigade, that's a pretty simple job that we go to, be there for a couple of hours, etc., etc. It's then probably our job to deal with the consequences of that. So what does no telephone communications for that community look like for the next week, 2 weeks? So there's no internet, there's no FPOS, people can't get money out of the bank, etc., etc. GPs can't get health records. The impacts when you unpack it are quite extensive, so it's our job to try and identify all those sort of things and then assign those tasks to different agencies so they can be mitigated, and obviously the community continues to function and is supported where the case may be. So a lot of those things are blind to you guys on the front line, but there is a group of people busily working away trying to identify that, and with the main focus of trying to support those things beyond the incident, but at the same time ensuring incident controllers have all the resources and information and support they require to effectively control the incident. And more importantly, allowing you guys on the front line to get on with the tactics and tasking of actually putting the fire out or mitigating the emergency. So that's what the Regional Control Team and Regional Emergency Management Team do in a nutshell. And probably to expand on that a little bit more about how it affects you, readiness arrangements, ICCs, most people heard of JSOPs and triggers for ICC, a few nods in the room. Yeah, so there's some doctrine that comes out from the state to try and standardise the way we do business across the state. Obviously, we measure the risk of fire in the landscape through fire danger ratings and the rest of it. So there's some guidance notes there that talk about when to put IMTs in place and what your considerations are, etc., etc. So readiness arrangements leading up to hot days and spike days in fire danger. The regional control and the regional control team would be considering things like IMT requirements, both short-term and longer-term. So what's the protracted weather? Are we looking at supplying IMTs for a number of days? Because the likelihood is we could get a fire in the landscape that will burn for a number of days. Aviation requirements, so putting a request into the state and moving the fleet around as required to put them in the hotspot, and then supplementing with local aviation assets as required. So that's always a bone of contention. Regional control teams, RMT, so we would do meetings leading up to those spike days. So if today's Thursday and Saturday's going to be a total fire ban, extreme type fire weather, we would be meeting all week, getting our arrangements in place, talking about resourcing levels both within agencies and to support things. And again, the state level. So there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the background with state level meetings and teleconferences to understand what the public messaging is that's going to come out from Craig or the other speakers at the state, to understand what resourcing levels are like, what other hazards are in the environment, what other major emergencies are going on. So all up, what's Victoria's capability and where are our priorities. So there's a lot of things that go into the readiness arrangements, and that obviously then flows through into the CFA districts, through the RDOs who will be sending out the pages about readiness for strike teams and ground observers and fire investigation, and all those sorts of things will ultimately flow out once we've made a decision about what our readiness levels are. The other part that probably is relevant is about the transfer of control that you're probably interested in. So when you've got that fire, when you've got that grass fire or something stooging around the bush that's got up and running, and the RDO or an ops officer might come out from the district and start talking to you about transferring control. So when does this job get controlled out of Gisborne, as opposed to where you're doing it, whether it be on the side of the road, etc. So that'll often be instigated by the regional control team, that conversation, once we've got an idea of what's likely to happen over the next couple of hours. So if we think those initial objectives are going to be met and we're going to pull it up, all well and good, but if those objectives are failing and the fire's continuing to grow and we're still throwing more and more resources at it and there's more and more complexities being involved, then the RDOs will certainly get a prompt to say, hey, we've got an incident management team in place, they're ready, they can assist about that transfer of control process. So there's a few triggers in that, and the RDOs are certainly very well versed at the processes to try and facilitate that transfer, because it can be complex. I suppose from my point of view, the whole transfer of control gets a different reception in different audiences. Some people don't mind it and quite like jobs being run out of ICCs, and other people hate it and just say, let us do what we do best and give us a couple of hours and we'll round it up. From my point of view, there's a whole lot of expectations from the public and from the government about what we do, and that's about the provision of information. It's about mitigating some of those secondary and tertiary consequences that result from fires. The firefight itself might be relatively simple, but if the impact on the community is a bit bigger, so disruption to schools and bus routes and impact on infrastructure and other things, those complexities need to be dealt with. And when we've got an incident management team ready that's resourced, trained and equipped to take care of a lot of that, by transferring control, my view is that it allows you guys to do what you do best, and that is the tactics and the tasking and control the fire trucks and control your sectors and your strike teams and put the fire out, control your aircraft and the rest of it. And the incident management team can then worry about putting out the warnings, putting out the public information about what are we going to do with parents wanting to get to the school to pick up their kids. They can worry about relief centres, they can worry about changeovers and catering and all those other tertiary things that come along to support the whole operation. So it's not about necessarily taking over the whole box and dice. It is about freeing up, providing extra capacity so that the technical, the tactical, the tasking is done where it should be done, and that's at the front line. But there's other people that can take care of those other expectations and provide a whole of service back to the community. So that's my take on some of the benefits of it. It can be challenging to do, yeah, it's done differently in different parts of the state, obviously, given the landscape and the impact on communities. So a fire burning for 3 hours on an extreme day in the Mallee is a little bit different to one burning in those same conditions in the Macedon Ranges. So it's not one model that suits all. So that's probably what I've got to say on transfer of control and the regional arrangements. I had put in a slide for questions and discussions, but Andy, if you want to leave it all to the last. I can stay around. Take questions at the end? All right. Well, thank you. I hope I didn't bore you to tears, and if I have, well, then the rest of the night should go up from this point. So, thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Much appreciated. And again, welcome aboard. It's great to see you in the Loddon Mallee. And like I said, you've got a fair patch of territory to cover. So hopefully we'll be seeing more of you. So when we were talking about themes for tonight a couple of months ago, one of the important factors that comes up every year is I suppose our obligations, or incident controllers' obligations, or the chief's obligations under the CFA Act in regards to warning the community. So we know that the state priorities, we know that our bread and butter stuff is protecting life and property, so we're already in that preparedness phase for that. The second one is community information and notifying the community of incidents, all types, as Scott's just spoken about. Predominantly tonight we're talking about bushfire, grass fire, but all types, so our warning system covers those. And there's been some changes, I suppose, in the last couple of years, so it's good for us every summer just to go over those. And in particular, what interests me about it is that as RDO, I'm going to have to make a call to whoever that first responding incident controller is. And if it's Scott Sally on Spring Hill Tanker, the last thing he wants to do when he's trying to take down a fire is talk to Andy Waterson on the phone. But what we're going to go through tonight is why it's so important that that one phone call occurs and the information that we get out of that one phone call, so that me as the RDO can then ring our vast network of people that are trained up in warnings and advice. So what some of you will not know is that we run a roster which will come on in the FDP, and with that roster we run an RDO. We always have an RDO, but with that roster comes a warnings and advice person. So those warnings and advice person take their gear home, and every time a fire starts up, when it's a day that might have some potential, generally we will ring those people and say, hey, got one going, and it's over at Carlsruhe, fire up your computer. And then that next phone call is from me to whoever the incident controller is, or the RDO to that incident controller, and we ask some specific questions. So really important to get those sit reps right. And I just want to welcome Beth and Greg, who are going to talk tonight on warnings and advice.
So, thanks for the opportunity, Andy, to contribute to tonight. We're an interesting team here. We have Beth, whose role is, in the context of fire, is a warnings and advice officer, and not active operationally, is that correct? No. And then we have Andy, who's at the RDO end, and in the middle we have me, who's a warnings and advice officer and also an operational firefighter. So my lot is to talk to you a little bit about the link between the fireground and the warnings and advice officer, and what critical information is needed to be passed in the initial phases through the RDO. In later phases, obviously, it goes through an incident control centre if an incident escalates. But for the initial phases, we can't wait for the minutes or hours it takes a incident control centre to be set up, particularly with a warnings and advice officer or a public information section. So we have in place this system where the RDO works with a warnings and advice officer who's available full time to them to get the ball rolling quickly. And this is short, sharp, do the urgent stuff, and then fill in the details afterwards. So the source of all truth for public messaging comes from the fireground. It's not that there's some godlike person up there in the RDO's chair or in the ICC who knows everything and is going to know what to say and what to do. They only know what we on the fireground tell them. And this is critical to understand the importance of conveying this initial short, sharp information. So they can't see the fire. If you've ever been to the Gisborne ICC, you know that even if you go outside on the deck, outside the air conditioning, you still can't see the fire unless it's in the backyard of Gisborne. And we are their eyes and ears. So we could have a really long, complex sitrep, and we'll have a look in a minute at what the Bushfire Handbook describes as a complete sitrep. and then we'll try and compare that with the sort of information that an RDO needs. What have I forgotten? So this information that we can provide almost simultaneously with our on-scene message is short and sharp, and it's to do with the really urgent things like resourcing and community messaging. Some community messaging has to happen very quickly. A fire that we had here near Kyneton not so long ago, we had a house burned in the time frame that would have been difficult for a warnings and advice officer to have their, that's what I get for being on call at work. A warnings and advice officer would have been lucky to get their computer fired up to get that sort of message out for them. So we're looking at information needing to move pretty quickly and be very focused on the immediate needs. So in the, where's my little book gone? It'll save me turning around to the screen. In the Bushfire Handbook, we talk about a big list of information. And if you filled that information out completely, you could take 15 minutes about this sit rep. In that time, you could have lost 2 houses and goodness knows what else, and the fire could be galloping away into the distance. So they want to know incident names and fireground or divisional command call signs. They want to know detailed locational information. They want to talk about potential to become a major emergency. May be very obvious to us in the fireground, but it may just be an imagination thing for people sitting in an ICC or trying to drive on the freeway up beyond Bendigo somewhere when we've got a fire in this area or vice versa. So slotted in there is for the incident controller to provide some information or advice to the RDO about any warnings that they think should happen. One of the things that we need to be clear about here is that an incident controller doesn't need to worry about these different names of the different types of messaging. We have advices, we have watch and acts, we have emergency warnings, and then we have telephone alerting and various other things. As incident controllers on the ground, we don't have to worry about that. All we need to do is inform the RDO that messaging is required. That there is a whole protocol around which sort of messaging goes, and if we give them the right information, while we get on with the job, they can be out there working out what the relevant messaging is and what the routes to give that messaging are. If we have particular information on the fireground that's relevant, we should convey it and then leave it to the others to provide. So property and assets, community assets and private assets at risk, fire status, type and size, and there's a lot of information we could provide in there about fuel types, slope, the localised weather we're dealing with, the incidence of spotting, the likelihood of the fire reaching certain places in certain times. So existing damaging and loss, the fire behaviour, estimate of forward rate of spread, our current control objectives and other assistance that we might require. So this could be a pretty lengthy thing to prepare, and it could be lengthy to give on the phone or on the radio when we've got lots of other tasks to do in that first few minutes when we might have 1 truck or 2 or 3 trucks there trying to get a handle on something, and we all know what the chaos is like then. We don't want to be worried about detail. We want to get on with the job. So we just want to provide the basic detail that's going to give the RDO something to work with and be able to get on with it. So we had a look at, can I borrow that portable one? Because I want to stand back and look at what I'm looking at. Is that on, Shelley? Yes, good. Not very loud. So the RDO wants to know, is this a bushfire, a car fire, a bin fire? So the type of hazard, the type of fire. It would be relevant to know, is it in bush? Is it in scrub? Is it in grassland? Is it in cropping? Is it in grazed grass or already harvested crop? Thank you. Is that any better? Good. We want to know about the location. I could probably go back here now. We want to know about location. but not necessarily about location in the sense that we think of it, where we give grid references and the like. They are really important, but probably an RDO is just going to scribble that down, because if he's driving along the highway, he's not going to be able to pull out his map book and put it on the steering wheel, at least I hope he won't, and do these calculations as he drives. What they need to know is some information like the nearest intersection, and that type of description of a location, and the things that are valid and valuable are point of origin and where the front of the fire is now. And with that information that's easy to remember or scribble down in a hurry, that can be conveyed, and then somebody who can sit still for a while can even start working out some prediction models. So a simple way of saying is, where did it start, where is it now, and where's it going towards? If we know where it's going towards, we get the sort of information that an RDO is going to need to tell Beth or me, preparing messaging, the sorts of warnings and advice that need to be given, because there are houses that are likely to be impacted within 30 minutes or an hour or 4 hours or something of the sort. And that all changes the type of messaging that we give. So what's in the way? You can suggest messaging, but don't worry about trying to suggest what sort of message it is. That's not our worry. If you have other urgent information, obviously you can convey it if it's relevant and urgent. But in this first initial call, you want to get the RDO off the phone as soon as possible. He wants to get off the phone as soon as possible. Ideally, if you've given a good set rep over the radio, he may have even heard that and not have to worry about ringing you. In order to do this, sometimes we are a bit reluctant to take the time to prepare, and we can really save ourselves a lot of airtime if we make some dot points in our logbook ready to read them out. It may not be detailed, but we can put down the stuff we need and save a lot of umming and ahhing if we actually prepare the relevant information. And when the call comes, or when we need to do a sit rep over the radio, we can do that, and it's effective and quick, and we get on with the job that we're best at. Beth? It's your turn.
I'll have to pull that down. I think people can see me over this. As Andy said, my name's Beth Taylor, and I'm one of the Warnings and Advice Officers in the Loddon Mallee region. And I'm the person who gets that phone call, or I'm one of the people who gets that phone call on a Saturday afternoon when I'm sitting in my lounge room watching telly from Andy saying, fire up your computer, we've got a fire going, we might have to put out a message. So I'm sitting there all alone, so the information Andy gives me over the phone is really important, that it's precise, so that I can create that message, because you would have noticed in our first little opening slide, there was a picture of a radio, a television, Facebook, Twitter, Vic Emergency website and app. When that message is published, that's where it goes. So it goes everywhere, it's really widespread, so it's really important that that information is spot on. So what I'm going to walk you through tonight is what I'll be doing when I'm sitting there at my computer, and what I'll be filling in as I'm forming the message. Now I think I've got this right. So the first thing I've got to do is draw a polygon. So that's really important that we get the location right. Now, as I said, I'm sitting at home. I don't have a map book with me, so a map reference doesn't help. But if I know it's at Springfield, between Smith Road and Brown Road, then that gives me somewhere to start. The second piece of information I need to know is which direction it's heading. Now, again, we're trying to do things quite quickly. Hopefully I can get this message out in 5 minutes, but they say it's heading in a southwesterly direction. And I go, hang on, which way is that? So, or they'll say, you know, the wind's coming from the northeast. Okay, so the wind's coming from the northeast. Which way does that mean the fire's going? If you can say the fire started at Springfield and it's heading towards Kyneton, that makes it so much easier. So bang, all of a sudden I can draw that polygon much faster. I also need to know if it's a grass fire or a bushfire. So if you can give me that information, where it started and where it's heading, really simple, then I can draw the polygon. The next piece of information I go to is looking at what communities are going to be impacted. So again, a little list comes up that I can select from. So if you can say, look, it's heading towards Kyneton, and sorry, I don't know what's between Springfield and Kyneton, but it's going to impact on A, B and C communities. So just sort of mention those, and even if you know that local names could be used, not the name that it's known by, that's really important, because if someone locally reads that message and my system tells me that there's a place in there called Brownsville, but everyone knows it as Brownstown or something like that. So some of that local information about what things are called is really important. So it goes on to the next one. Oops, I can't see my little sheet there. This just shows that when the message goes out, it just doesn't go out to those places that were indicated in the beginning, like Facebook and the media outlets. It also goes to the Regional Control Centre, it goes to the state, so it goes right out, so that's automatically done by the warning system. This is the most important page that I fill out, because it tells me what sort of fire I'm dealing with, how fast that fire is moving, where it's heading towards, and when that community will be impacted. So that's the really important information I need. Because you've got to remember, I'm trying to get this message out really quickly for a start, and we call these our short and dirty messages, that first one that goes out straight from the incident controller on the fire ground, and I want to try and get this message out within 5 minutes. So again, that's the critical information I need. Depending on what the type of fire it is, the system then comes up with a few templates and things that will automatically feed into the system. So this one is, this is what we want the community to do. So say, for example, if this was an emergency warning, it would say it is too late to leave, take shelter. If it's a watch and act, it'll tell them, you know, you can have time to leave and things like that. So this is what we're telling the community that we want them to do. They either stay or they leave. The next one is things that the community can do for themselves. So it's things like being aware of changing in weather conditions. So if a watch and act message goes out, we've told them to monitor the situation. We've told them to what direction to travel, any roads that might be closed, that type of thing. So that goes in there. The last one is any impacts in the area. Now this is really important in terms of if we've told them it's still safe to travel, any roads that might be impacted. Really good example, if it's a heavy scrub fire and there's lots of smoke, it could be impacting on some of the major roads. So it's really important to give that information as well, so we can put that in the message. And it's all about keeping people safe. And finally, there's just the generic information that goes on to all messages. So really, what we're doing when we put this first message out, we want to have it in simple English. We want it to make sense to the people that are being impacted by the incident, and we need to know where it started, the direction the fire is travelling, and specifically if it's travelling towards a town. As I said, if it's going from Springfield to Kyneton, that's great. So instead of in a south-easterly direction, the speed of the fire. If the fire is going to impact Kyneton, roughly what timelines we have, so that helps us work out what sort of message to put out, whether life and property are at risk, any local hazards. You know, there might be a chemical factory halfway between those two towns. So that's something that we need to know so we can factor in for our messages. And then other things like if there's a school, we look at the time, it's 3 o'clock, we know that that's going to impact the messaging we put out around parents going to pick their children up from school, what roads might be closed, so how we might have to alter our message there. As I said, this first message that goes out is pretty short and sharp, but if I'm filling out the template, which I just showed you, and I get halfway through it and I go, gee, they forgot to tell me what direction the fire's going. Even though I should have asked, sometimes you get a little bit stressed because that didn't come through. So that means I have to ring Andy. Andy then has to ring the incident controller on the fire ground. He has to give that information to Andy, and then Andy calls me back, and then I have to go back and fill it in. Now, Andy's not going to be sitting there waiting for my call. The incident controller on the fire ground isn't going to be sitting there waiting for Andy's call. So that could add 15 minutes onto the time that it takes to get our message out. So it's really important that you take probably even just an extra 30 seconds to say, I've got location, I've got direction, I've got speed, I've identified some landmarks that can go into it, I've identified property life at risk, any other important things like schools, highways, anything like that, so we can get that short message out. Because as I said, often my only contact with the fireground is via Andy, via phone from my lounge room. So that's why it's really important, because it can get a bit stressful, especially if there's a few small fires coming in. And as Greg said, don't get hung up on whether it should be a watch and act, whether it should be a warning and an emergency warning, whether it should be advice. From the information that you give Andy, and as he's giving that information to me, we decide, hang on, look, the best type of warning to put out is a watch and act, because it's not going to impact that community for another 5 hours. So let's just get them aware. So I think I've covered it pretty well. So and I think I've run out of slides. Yep, so I have to. So as both Greg and I will be here at the end. So if you do have any questions, please ask. Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Now, one of the things that Beth mentioned was the importance of getting that location right. So if anyone in the room rings me as RDO and says we've got a fire at Springfield and it's going to Kyneton, my next call is to Bill to take RDO because I'm going home. So those people who do an outstanding job, who are really busy, and you can see by what Beth brings up on the computer, there's a lot going on in that space. So tonight, for example, the RDO in District 2 gets a call where they need to put out a warning of some description, goes to a headquarters number. So a rostered headquarters person who may never have heard of Carlsruhe or Denali would be in charge or developing that warning for us. So we rely on the information from the fireground, which is everyone out here in front of us. So thanks very much, Beth, and thanks very much, Greg. So our next agenda item is a quick break and a quick cuppa for those that want one. So Michelle, back down to our Salvo crew. So if anyone wants to have a quick break, we're back at about, let's make it 8 o'clock. Thank you.
Presentation. It is? No. Assume so. Oh, it is. Oh, cool. It's the next one. Oh, it's after Glasgow's. But I just wanted to know, because everyone keeps moving around. I just wanted to know if I could see.
I don't know what they're doing there.
Yeah, that's all right.
Have you seen Liz?
No, I haven't. Well, not before we started. We can change the lineup if you want, if you need to buy more time.
So everyone should be back in the room by about 8:05. Beautiful, mate. Thanks, Les. Thank you. So one in where? WA? That was a quick trip. How are you, Wendy? Good. Yeah, always. You've got to be somewhere. Yeah, it wasn't bad. Right. Yeah. Around the it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much. Okay, we've had a slight change in the schedule. We've got our aircraft expert, Adam, congratulations, who's come in tonight to talk about some of the changes with the state aircraft fleet. Aircraft operations, so not just the PDD stuff, not just the bombing, but what else is available to us out in the field. So welcome Adam Damon.
Thanks very much, Andy and Bill, for the opportunity to talk tonight on aircraft. Cool. My name's Adam Damon. I'm a volunteer with the Mount Macedon Fire Brigade, but I'll declare my conflict of interest now. I'm also an employee of Forest Fire Management Victoria, and I think that's how I got part of this gig. Part of my daily role at work is working with aviation. So I'm one of the senior crew members of Firebird 300, the aerial information gathering platform. And tonight I'm just going to take you through some of the aircraft changes for this season. Also PDD changes, especially in District 2. And then I want to take you through managing PDD at your incident. So I think District 2's led the way in the utilisation of PDD. It was the pilot area around Bendigo for PDD. And it's really well and effectively used, but there's always room for improvement, and I think we can talk through some strategies tonight that are common themes across the state about how we can better utilise PDD and how we can empower you guys as first responders to work better with PDD aircraft. And then I'll just touch on use of personal drones. This is becoming a huge emerging issue for emergency agencies that operate aircraft with, I suppose, general public and other members of agencies using personal drones around incidents and what that means for aircraft operations. The fleet for this year, 49 aircraft this year, so that's another additional aircraft on last year, and that aircraft's going into Bacchus Marsh. And that has a change in PDD boundaries around the southern end of District 2, especially down the Macedon Ranges end. There's a range of contracts in place from 10 to 20 weeks, 32 firebombing aircraft, so that's an additional one from last year. So 16 fixed-wing single-engine air tankers, as well as the 2 large air tankers, and 16 helicopters. And the remainder of the fleet are utility aircraft used for air attack supervision, reconnaissance, information gathering, hover exit, and line scan mapping. And they operate out of 29 locations across the state. PDD this year has increased to operate from 24 of those locations, so you'll see further PDD areas come on board. And the main one for us is the new area around Bacchus Marsh that covers effectively from Mount Macedon down through to the Bellarine Peninsula. And this is the new map. So the big changes for the district are that the PDD that used to cover Mount Macedon group that came out of Mangalore, that'll now be covered by Bacchus Marsh, with Romsey group still having the Mangalore aircraft. So there's no changes to the Bendigo footprint, but what we'll see is improved response time to the southeastern end of the district. So the flight time from Bacchus Marsh to Mount Macedon is significantly lower than it is from Mangalore to Mount Macedon. So Mangalore PDD will still cover the Romsey group boundary, so north of the Mount. Bacchus Marsh it will cover south of the Mount effectively, and then everything west of the Mount past Kyneton will be covered by the Bendigo unit. So some nuances around how PDD works. So the Bendigo one will still come with its air attack supervisor. But as we know down the southern end, the Mangalore PDD last year, it didn't have an air attack platform. So it's heavily reliant on the first responder and the incident controller on scene to provide direction. And that will be the same for the Bacchus Marsh PDD aircraft, so there'll be no air attack. But in saying that, there are rostered air attacks sitting at Bendigo, Essendon and Ballarat that can be brought in to provide additional capability as required. But effectively, the first, I suppose, page of the aircraft will just be, especially down the southern end, will just be a tactical firebombing aircraft with no aerial supervision. Next part, so I suppose that's the major change. How does that affect how we manage PDD? So really what I want to spend tonight talking about is how you, as the crew leader on the first responding appliance, can work with PDD to get the most out of it. And also how to free it up to move it on to another job, because there's only 49 aircraft in the fleet. There is some ability to expand that, but once those 26 PDD aircraft are utilised, there's no more PDD, it runs out pretty quickly. So some of the considerations for you as a first responding crew, is it available or coming? So there's a raft of triggers that we're familiar with around PDD. So, you know, there's a time constraint between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. Or 9 to 7 on a TFB or elevated fire danger day at the direction of the State Response Controller. But also FDI triggers as well. So are we within the FDI? Are we within the time frame? Is the aircraft already committed to another job, or is it offline for maintenance or committed to a campaign somewhere else in the state? So that's the first one you need to think about. The next one, when you get on scene, do you need the aircraft? Can you get on top of the fire, or is the aircraft going to help you significantly change the game and I suppose make initial attack successful? And that's probably the question. Can you do initial attack with the tankers you've got on the road within the time frame, or is that aircraft the kind of the game changer you need to get on top of that fire? And the big one, what's your fireground or command channel going to be for that aircraft? The success of PDD is effective communication between the ground and the air, and so that channel is pretty important. And just to give you some background on how an aircraft works around communications, there are 4 radios in an aircraft, and this is something to consider as we work through this, I suppose, considerations. So there's a trunking radio which enables the aircraft to communicate with the state air desk They're flight following, so either through an airbase, an aircraft officer based at the district, or an RDO. They also have a standard radio like you see in your trunk, so it'll do conventional channels, so CFA dispatch, fireground and command channels. And they also have 2 aeronautical radios so that they can talk to other aircraft. So you think about the pilot in that PDD aircraft coming out of Mangalore or Essendon. He's got 4 radios potentially coming into his headset at any one time that he's trying to juggle other aircraft, ground traffic, flight following with an aircraft officer or an airbase, and any other logistics they need to organise. The trunk radio is always left in the trunk mode so that there's a direct contact method for the aircraft for logistics and management. And then if there's additional aircraft in the fleet, call when needed, or interstate aircraft brought in, like we see with major incidents or spike day. So we're seeing more aircraft come over the border now. With national arrangements, there's more fluidness around how we share aircraft, especially with New South Wales, and we'll start to see that more with South Australia too along the border. So they generally won't have the same communications capability as a Victorian aircraft. So the considerations for communications: how are you, as the incident controller or the first responding crew, going to set yourself up to manage your fireground and your aircraft communications that you need? Because remember, a PDD aircraft won't bomb without direction from the controller on the ground. So good communications from the incident control to the aircraft is required to be effective. And the easiest way to do this is to think of aircraft like a sector. So it's probably your first sector. As your PDD aircraft comes in, sectorise it off. So to contain it away from the rest of your ground operations, task it and let it go. And then the other one we're pressing this year is try and remove aircraft off busy fireground channels. Pilots don't like it. They generally try and dial that radio down. So the more traffic coming over a fireground or command channel, they tend to generally creep the radio down to lower the audio going into their helmets. So try and get them onto a channel where you can better manage them if you've got that. If you can't, don't worry about it, leave them on there. Especially in that early phase of a fire, just manage it. And here's a bit of a pictorial diagram of the complexity of aircraft communications. So as I walk through this, you'll see, your first truck rocks up, you're talking to Vic Fire on dispatch. You've also got an idea that you're going to have a fireground channel to do your operations, whether that's with your own crew at the start or for oncoming appliances. So, we get a command vehicle. We now have got some fireground. Here comes your PDD aircraft. They're also talking to the state air desk back in Melbourne to let them know that that they're unavailable, but also to Vic Fire too to confirm that they've taken off, to try and get further information, get that fireground channel, and confirm to you guys that they're on their way. So when they get overhead, you'll see that now they've switched over to the ground channel. So they'll be juggling still potential calls with the air desk to get aeronautical frequencies and things like that. But now they're also starting to interact with the fireground. Then there could be an airbase involved. So that could just be the support that the helicopter needs, fuel, foam, all that kind of stuff. So they get sporadic calls as well from that. And they can do that over multiple radios, as well as additional helicopters. And so as these come in, what happens is the air attack supervisor really does become that sector commander, and he'll segregate off all those operational tactical helicopters onto aeronautical and other frequencies to really limit their exposure to the fireground traffic and command traffic. So here they'll act as the strike team leader or sector commander for the rest of the aircraft fleet. Then you just throw in the ICC for a mix, and as we transition out of first attack into prolonged attack, that adds complexity as well around transfer of control of aircraft, officer roles, and also incident roles and changing of channels. So as you can see, for the poor guy in the first arriving aircraft, there's a lot going on over the first couple of hours that they've got to manage. So you want to try and make that as easy as they can so they can focus on their primary goal, which is to fly the aircraft and drop the water. So that's their primary thing. If they get too overburdened with traffic and things like that, their performance really takes a dive. Air attack supervisor. So with the Bendigo machine, you always get the air attack supervisor. So you get a senior agency person that has fire experience, knows what's going on the ground, in the air with the tactical machine. Remember, the air attack supervisor works for you as the incident controller, not the other way around. The ground doesn't work for the air attack supervisor. I can't stress this enough. Air attack supervisors at times like to, I suppose, use artistic license to make decisions and go. So they work for you. So you need to firm up that communication and take control and task them appropriately. They will offer you advice. They can see things you can't see. It's really valuable advice a lot of the time. But just always remember, they work for you. They will manage a tactical aircraft, so that's one less job you have to do. So if you get that structure in place overhead, your burden will be to tell them what your tactics are, and then they can work out the specific operational requirements for the aircraft around that. As I was saying, they have extensive fire operations experience. Generally, they've done a lot of years of ground firefighting before they've got through the ranks to become an air attack supervisor. Use it. They ask them questions if they've got time. If you want to know where things are, use them like an air observer. They have that bird's eye view. So they can give you a really good operational overview of how your fire tactics are going and where your resources are. So one of the big things you see from the air is where all the resources are versus where the fire is. And it's quite interesting at times. This is their view of the world. So, they get a pretty good view. They can step back for a while they've tasked their helicopters, and they can really have a look at what's going on and help you make better tactical decisions. So don't overlook that as an option for information. Just to show you how everything fits into the stack, when you bring aircraft in, your fire becomes three-dimensional pretty quickly. So, you've got all your trucks and ground crew running around the fire, but there's actually this layered cake approach to aviation as well to make it fit seamlessly together and integrate into the ground operations. So you'll see your air attack supervisors, they sit towards the lower end with the tactical aircraft, and then you can bring in an air observer. Generally, that'll happen with an IMT in place, or that might be through the district as part of their readiness, that there's an air observer doing a patrol run around the district looking for smoke or lightning, things like that. So they'll sit a little bit higher. They give you really good information. And then above that's all the specialist aviation capability. So aerial information gathering, infrared line scan, and then there's remote sensing, I suppose, from satellite as well. So there's quite a lot of capability within the aircraft fleet to provide better information to help you guys and incident management teams make better decisions. Tasking. It's important when you're tasking to identify hazards. So don't just assume, this is a good one, there's in the photo there's high voltage power lines. Don't just assume that the incoming air crew will pick up or know that there are hazards in the fire area. Swirl lines are really hard to see from the air, so they're a huge risk to bombing operations, as well as power lines, other strung cables across dams, flying foxes, all kinds of things that are out there. During the drought, there was a lot of places where people strung cable across dams for who knows what, but it did limit the ability at a lot of locations to pick water up. So even mobile phone towers, things like that, just things that might be obscured by smoke at a time, always good to just call out when you've got your incoming helicopter that there's wires, in the northern part of the fire or things like that. And be clear in what you want. So try and talk in I suppose, in bearings or direction, so north or south, not left or right of the road, because when you turn around in an aircraft, left's on the other side and you come back, just like your vehicle. So, or hit the head of the fire, or, work the western flank. Be really direct with what you want. You don't have to be specific, but just make sure it's clear from the air what you're trying to talk about. Unfortunately, it's hard to read a Melways or a map book in your aircraft, so road names aren't great, or local place names, because aircraft come from a long way away. A bit like community and warnings, the pilot may not actually know the area they're flying over. So, I mean, there's a big clue for a pilot about where they're going. There's normally a giant column of smoke, so it makes it pretty easy. Unlike when you're training and there is no smoke and no one can find anything. But there's generally a column of smoke to fly towards. Generally, the aircraft will, gravitate towards the head of the fire and the flanks where it's really active to try and give it a knockdown. But if you want something different to what they're doing, you just ask them. They are all people. I think, we at times get a little bit scared of talking to the kind of the magical men in their flying machines, but they are just firefighters like you and I, or commercial pilots, on contract working for us. They're here to help, and they're happy to have a chat. And if you catch up with one on the ground, they'll talk your ear off. Water. With water, good to have an idea of where you might want to take water from, but ultimately the pilots will find water. They can see it from the air. They'll figure out what works best for their machine in the conditions they're flying in. So don't get too caught up in having to identify a water point for a helicopter. They're pretty good at finding their own water most of the time. You can suggest them. You may want to tell them to steer clear of a reservoir, or something like that, or a sewage treatment plant. But they will generally find a pretty good water source, and they'll generally stick to it. So they generally like to take from one spot. It makes it a lot easier to reconcile loads and deal with replacement water after. And something new for this year that we've been working on is the drop and pick up location data will be available via EMCOP and EMAP. So every aircraft logs where it drops and where it takes water from, and this year all that data will be available in near real time into our systems to allow IMTs especially to actually know what's going on and see where the drops are happening, where they're taking water from, so we can be really preemptive on, I suppose, working with the community in the recovery phase to replace critical water. Working with aircraft. So this is a good example. Fire truck there. It's hitting the edge. Helicopters hitting the higher point, working together in unison to kind of tackle the fire. What we've seen a lot with PDD is this is not the case. Effectively, the ground operation will stop in a section where the helicopter's working because of the perception that there needs to be a huge safety margin around the firebombing operation. It does. You shouldn't be near the drop zone, but it doesn't mean you need to stop putting the flank of the fire out. So you just need to be either behind the helicopter or out to the side by 30 to 50 metres away from the drop zone, and you'll be pretty right. But what the feedback from a lot of the air attacks involved in PDD is a lot of the ground crews stop and prop on roads and wait for the helicopter to bomb the fire out before entering in and doing any work. So effectively the helicopter's carrying the heavy load. Helicopters don't put fires out, ground resources do. So they will buy you time to get enough resources and help you knock the head down, knock the flanks down. But ultimately, it's the big red trucks that make, I suppose, a fire contained, not a helicopter. And so that's the key take-home message. There's a fair bit of heli mopping that goes on. So releasing an aircraft, considerations for how long you hold on to those resources are very discretional on the incident controller and their level of confidence around being able to hold and contain the fire. And just remember, photos are great too, but we are there to put the fire out. So there's some great footage of 10 tankers worth of people all with their phones out, watching the firebombing operation while the fire's, you know, kind of 50 metres off them, and they're all parked up. So just remember that. It is good to get the odd shot, but we are there to try and contain the fire as quickly as we can. And I'll just wrap up. So working with aircraft, there's a great video that was produced by CFA, EMV and I suppose DELP around aircraft safety. So the link's in this presentation. It's only about 10 minutes long, really good for a brigade training night to have a look at. Just ignore the start. It's a bit dated. It's from a couple of years ago, but the content around communications and aircraft safety is really valid. And I'd just like to touch on drones. There's a trend, I suppose, as the popularity of personal drones goes up, we're starting to see more and more occurrences of drones in operational airspace for firefighting aircraft. There's been a couple of incidents in New South Wales last year and one in Victoria where drone operators were filming active operations with inbound aircraft. And that's different to the agency's use of drones, which is tightly managed. But I think there's a role for all of you. If you see someone operating a drone and you know there's a potential for aircraft, for you to escalate that through your chain of command and get it dealt with. The policy at the moment is if a drone is identified on a fire ground, then the aircraft operation will be suspended until it can be cleared to be safe for aircraft to re-enter. That could be the difference between containing a fire on day one and a campaign fire, potentially. There's been a couple of actual hits in America this year with air tankers and lead planes hitting drones in flight, and I have to move forward. So I've lost my spot now. So it's going to become more. It's going to become more of an issue for our operations over the coming years. I suppose as the popularity of them grows. So just one to take home tonight. If you see something at any kind of job you're at where someone's launching a drone, just make sure you escalate that through your chain of command so it can be dealt with. And that's it. Thank you.
Righto, thanks very much, Adam. Our next speaker tonight, we've been lucky enough to secure Les Veering for 20 minutes. So those of you in the room, most people in the room will know Les. Les is a very, very, very experienced firefighter and a leader in the hazardous tree area. So thanks for putting your time into us tonight, Les. It's much appreciated. So I hand over to Les Veering.
Nearly there, sorry.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks, Andy, for the invite along tonight, and it's always a pleasure to come along and do this presentation. I guess, come over here. Sorry. Oops. Is that better? All right, thanks. So it's a pleasure for me to come along and do this presentation, and I guess I've done a few of these presentations with CFA and one at Romsey last year, so some of you have probably seen this before. It'll be this will be an abbreviated version of that. Hopefully I won't put you to sleep tonight like we did last time, so it'll be short and sharp. But have any questions as we come through or when we finish, by all means just fire them at us. It's certainly becoming a big issue for us, hazardous trees. Unfortunately, part of my job was to investigate the incident we had at Harriettville in 2013, where we had 2 of our people were killed with a falling tree, and since then I've put together some packages on what to look for and what we should be doing on the fire ground to try and minimise the risk of it happening again. And probably emphasise it's just about minimising that risk. We're never going to eliminate that risk altogether, but hopefully we'll try and minimise it as much as we can. It's certainly a big issue going forward, because one of the things that causes hazardous trees is really hot fires. So as we go back into those areas that have been burnt by really hot fires in the past, we're going to be dealing with hazardous trees. So we'll go through a bit of a presentation and hopefully you'll identify some of the things, some telltale signs of some things to look for as you go into areas. And I know I've done the presentation with a few different areas, and most people tell me after they've been through it all, they'll never look at trees the same ever again, and hopefully that will be the case. And you sort of often not just look down at what's happening on the ground, but it's actually not just look up where Adam's been looking all night and up in the clouds, but look at the tops of the trees and the sides of the trees, and just see if we can pick up any telltale signs that the tree could be hazardous. The one there we've got in the picture was just some guys doing some mopping up, and thank God they actually weren't in that vehicle, and otherwise, we'd have probably had some more fatalities. And we've had, I know ourselves, quite a few similar incidents with our vehicles, and we've probably been fortunate enough, we've probably only had the 2 fatalities. We've been very close to having quite a few more, and most of my job I do is quite good. I'm a bit like Adam. I have a day-to-day job where I do work for, actually I'm not sure, I work for Forest Fire Management. I'll find out tomorrow. I'm actually meeting my new boss and the restructure, but part of DELP anyhow. And also I'm not as far up the tree in CFA as Adam. I'm about the 35th lieutenant at Campbell's Creek, I think. So, so I've done a few presentations in our department and currently working on a package that we can, I think some of it's actually going online, which will be, I think, most vols are expected to try and do it as soon as they can. It's just an awareness type package of hazardous trees, and then we're currently doing a process of doing a package for tree markers to identify and actually mark hazardous trees. So as you get on the fire ground, there's probably a couple of things you might come across. So trees that actually have dots on them, some of them might have crosses on them, and some will actually have Ks on them. And it's about understanding what each one does. So mainly from a bushfire perspective, the main ones you'll come across will be, actually, no, you probably come across them all, but main ones are probably the ones with Ks on them. So K is where we've deemed it to be a clear, trees got clear and present danger. So we K for killer trees, so potentially it's going to fall down and impact where we potentially may have people working. So it's something where, as a fire's already gone through, we'll need to identify those trees. So they'll have a K on them. So if you see a K on a tree, for Christ's sake, keep away from it and make sure we keep everybody else away from it. And one of the incidents I had to review was some guys from South Australia that came across after the 2009 fires to give us a hand, and they'd actually been around, identified a tree as being hazardous and taped it. Taped it and said, yes, that's hazardous. And then as they were walking away, they walked away downhill from the tree, and it fell as they were walking away and landed on and cleaned them. Well, actually, landed on them both, and both sustained fairly serious injuries, but one of them quite serious spinal injuries, but since made a recovery pretty much, I think, which is lucky. So it's really important just not understanding that the trees are there, where those trees are going to fall. And if you're in the mountain country, and we get sent all around the state these days more and more, if we're in the mountain country, and particularly if it's a dead tree and it's got no top left on it, and that tree could be 50 or 100 metres above you, if it hits, it can slide downhill quite some distance. In fact, I've got a photo of one somewhere where guys said that tree came from about 200 metres up the hill and then speared down into the bank of on the road, and it speared in about 3 feet into the side of the bank, where it went in actually into the road. So it would just go straight through a truck. They can also fall into other trees, and one of the jobs I had to review recently was where guys were doing some falling of a hazardous tree, and actually they fell the tree and they finished up on their vehicle, which was about 2 tree lengths away and sideways to where they thought it was going to be. It landed into one tree, then knocked another tree over, and it went sideways and finished up cleaning up their vehicle. So it's not just 1 tree length away, which is the issue, and particularly in steep country. So. All right, so the other one you'll find we use dots and X's, and particularly for a planned burn, so whether it's one of our fuel reduction burns or it's a back burn at a going fire, where we go along, once we've identified the control line, we'll go along and then identify potential hazardous trees, not ones that are actually on fire at the moment, but they're ones that once we put fire into the landscape, start burning that patch, we suspect will potentially catch on fire and burn down. So if we think we can save a tree, we'll put a dot on it. So maybe an existing hollow tree, maybe even just a mongrel old stringy bark that we know is going to throw a whole stack of spots across the control line and drive us mad. We'll put a dot on it and then get the bulldozer to try and put a track around it. We may foam it down just prior to light up. We're doing a bit of work at the moment with ground applied retardant. There's a few different ways we can do it, but we'll try and put a dot on it, which means we want to prevent that tree from catching fire. So even we've put a dot on it, and maybe we've even put a Rako trail around it, we've put a bulldozer track around it, there's still not a 100% guarantee that will work. It'll probably work in about 90% of the cases. So we still need to be vigilant as you go along patrolling that edge of fire. Every time you see a dot tree, get out and have a really good look, make sure it hasn't caught on fire. And sometimes, they'll catch on fire on the opposite side of where you're driving, so it's good to go off the truck and have a walk around, just make sure it hasn't caught on fire at the back. It may well be still some a bit of humusy type leaf litter and stuff on the ground that's burning slowly through, and then can actually still get to the tree later on, which could be 3 or 4 hours or even a day later. Sometimes that will actually happen. So when you see those dot trees on your line, always just be looking out for them. And if you're in stringy bark country, for those who've done a bit of stuff in stringy bark, and a lot of you guys would have them around here, you know that if the trees are close together, once the tree back behind that one catches on fire, just the radiant heat coming off stringy barks can be enough to ignite the next tree along. So you may have actually raked it around the bottom and put the bulldozer around it, and bugger me, it still catches on fire, just the radiant heat. So and we have to be very careful of those, and particularly if it's got a hollow in it, a fair chance it'll just run straight up into the hollow and start burning away from on the inside, and you may not even know it's burning, and all of a sudden that's enough to weaken the tree and it can actually fall down. And if we put an X on it, basically means we don't think it's worth trying to save it. It's too much effort to try and save it, or it might be in steep, rough terrain where we can't get a bulldozer to put a track all the way around it. The bottom side might be too steep, but they actually can push it over because they have to push downhill, so we'll push them over and get rid of them. So we try to minimise that as much as we can and make some mess on the ground. And even every time you push a tree, there's potential, can come over backwards on the machine, or it may leave a hanger in another tree where it falls into, which can be a hazard for us as well. So, but yeah, if we don't think we can save it easily, we'll put an X on it, and before we light up, we'll get a machine, either a bulldozer or an excavator, to go through and push it over for us. I think from my perspective, the main thing is, most of the people here will be very experienced, crew leader type people, that it's your job, I suppose, to go back and educate the others in your brigades that come along on the trucks where they're not as experienced, particularly those K-type trees. They're the ones that are most dangerous because they're the ones that can burn down quite quickly, and we make sure that all our people know what a K means. It means you keep the hell away from it, but also never be 100% sure that every tree has been got. We go through, we do marking, particularly there's a fair bit of understory. You don't always get every tree, so there'll never be 100% guarantee we'll get every tree there, so always be on the lookout. And when we go through and mark, so generally an initial attack of a fire, we go through, we might put a bulldozer track around it, or it might be contained just with water. Then once we've done that, before we start doing mop-up, that's when we need to start doing our assessment. So in that first little while between we first doing first attack, I've seen trees fall over within 20 minutes of a fire going through. So you might be the third or fourth truck coming in, and all of a sudden it's starting to fall just as you get in. Small dead spars will fall quite quickly. So Just that early stage can be quite dangerous as well. So it's part of your dynamic risk assessments. That's really what you need to do as you get in there. Is it safe to be there? In fact, I just come away from running a safety officer course the last couple of days. We ran a scenario, and one was some dead ash country and going into the evening, and one of the crews there said, well, I don't actually think we should even be in there. And I said, well, that's probably a bloody good idea. And look at what we're trying to protect. So it's about risk versus reward. What are the risks of going in there? What's the reward if we do go in there and save a bit extra bush? Is it really worth it? And I guess that's something I'd like you to think about, is that risk-reward type stuff. Is it worth going in there, and can it wait till tomorrow? And one of the jobs I had to investigate was, in fact, a good mate of mine actually got cleaned up, and so lucky to be alive. It's not funny, but got cleaned up at night time, and he was aware of the tree. He thought it was going to fall one way, and then it fell somewhere different. And in fact, it fell where he thought it would, but actually fell into another tree, which he didn't see, and it came down and actually clobbered him. So night-time operations are quite dangerous. So I just really want to say, if in doubt, just have a really good look about, do we need to be in there, and particularly at night time, and but even in daytime. If we can get a track around it, get it contained, well then give Adam a call. He's got plenty of mates down there. How about 48 bloody helicopters on contract, and he just flick his finger and he'll have about 20 of them there for you. And maybe until we get some bulldozers there and get it sort of stitched up properly, that maybe it's the aircraft or the way we can actually do a lot of our patrolling work until it's safe for us to go through, mark the area out and get a machine in there to push the trees over. All right, so some of the things we look at when we're trying to determine if a tree is going to burn down. So if it's dead, and I think I told the Romsey group, we hired all these scientists that studied this 2 years. I think they did a study on a lot of our planned burns we do to try and work out which trees are the ones that are most likely to burn down. So after about 2 years, they really determined that the ones that most likely to burn down were the dead ones. I thought, Christ. Thank Christ I didn't spend 4 years at university to learn all that stuff. I thought maybe they could have paid me a little bit less than what they paid them. I could have perhaps told them as well. And kind of most bush people would have worked that out as well. But anyhow, so, and dead trees, particularly in the ash country, it's been dead for a few years, are always particularly dangerous. And how long it's been dead for, if it's a fresh dead tree, there's no cracks in it, well, I guess less likely to catch on fire. And I'll show you a few photos. Actually, I see my screen, I see the next slide coming up, which is a good idea, but I'll show you in a minute the next slide about looking for scars and hollows in trees. And talk a little about the new wood that grows around trees that actually holds it back up. So, and again, windy days as well. So how strong the wind actually is in a day. So there's no doubt that the stronger the wind, more chance these trees are going to blow over. I don't know if anybody's worked in in red gum country, at old manna gum country, it'll drop limbs any time, but more than likely on the windy days it's even worse. So, and the time of year can even be important. So springtime, there's a bit of moisture still in the wood at the moment, so we'll find if we're doing any burning in our box ironbark country that less trees will burn down in spring than what there is in autumn. So as the summer goes by, the dead timber dries out more and more, and it's much easier to catch on fire and keep on burning. And then the leaner the trees, the bigger the lean, more, or probably the less it needs to be weakened before it's going to fall down. And same as if it's on a slope. So probably, particularly on steep slopes, as a general rule, probably at least 95% of trees will fall downhill. So just again, if you've ever got fire above you, and what you may well see when you look up the hill is trees that look quite sound from your perspective. And I'll show you some things to think about. Well, I guess a lot of you know your local bush where it's been burnt before, but if you go into other areas, I'll give you a few little tips to what to look for to say, has there been a hot fire been through before? And generally as a rule, no matter which way the wind's blowing, in a steep country, it'll always burn uphill. So you'll find scars on the top side of the trees, and then when you're looking down from the bottom, you won't see those scars, and the tree will be burning away on the other side, and you won't even know about it until it falls down on you. And even species can make a difference. You've got box trees, red gum trees. Once they catch on fire, they don't go out unless we put them out. Whereas often we go to the mountains where the timber's not as dense. Nights are cooler, more humid. Sometimes those trees will go out by themselves, but not in this part of the world. And how hot the fire is can be really important as well. The hotter the fire, The previous fire that's been through there, the hotter that fire's been, the more it's going to scar, but also when this next fire comes through, the hotter that fire is, the more likely it's going to ignite trees and catch on fire, and more likely going to keep on burning and burn down. How are we going? Andy, how much time? We've got 5 minutes? All right, we'll skip through fairly quickly. So basically that's what we call scarring on trees. So that's a whole fire scar. Those trees are actually side by side. The only difference, are both burnt by exactly the same fire. One's a little bit bigger tree than the other. And make sure I'm looking at the back to front to what I see, but certainly the one on your left, the only difference, it's a bigger tree, and the scarring hasn't grown over as yet, but you can see some cracks starting to form in that tree already, and that fire's burnt from the opposite side, comes through, fire's licked up the back of the tree, and then most people actually don't realise this, but that's fire scarring. I don't understand why fire does that, but because it doesn't actually appear for about 7 to 10 years after the fire's been through, when the bark peels off and exposes these scars. And the next fire comes through, bingo, got some nice dry wood to catch on fire, and you'll see some new wood that's starting to grow around there. Not sure if I pointed here or not, but oops, whoop, wasn't that button anyhow? Didn't work. Oh, I'll leave these alone, I think. But we see some new wood starting to grow around there, and it'll give it some strength. But certainly for fire, and eventually that will grow over like the one on your right. A few years' time, probably, I took that photo about 2000 when I was writing a paper on how hollow trees form. And if we go back now, that tree, the one on the right, will be completely grown over, but it'll still have all that dry wood in the middle, be termites munching it out, and up the top you can guarantee there'll be a hollow up there. So if fire runs up that tree, it'll get inside the hollow and it'll be all dead inside, it'll burn its way, and eventually weaken it and potentially make it fall down. All right, so things to look for, we go into old fire areas. Often you can see dead tops, but often you'll see those little epicormics, little tiny little buds that come out within, I've actually seen them come out within weeks after a fire, get a good shower of rain, the crown's been taken out of the tree, throughout the little epicormics, so it's life support system, and you'll see those on the sides of trees, and if they get bigger and bigger, generally means they've been there for a good reason, that the crown's been taken out. Needs sets this life support system, so it's had a hot fire go through there, and probably within 7 or 8 years' time there'll be some scarring appear on the other side of the tree. And when they get a lot of those, it's going to get quite big. You'll generally know it's been a hot fire go right through there. So if you start to see those right through a patch, the alarm bell should start the ringing, should be looking a bit higher, see if there's any hollows in those trees, but certainly there'll be damage inside. So we sort of think, yep, we're going into an area where there's been a hot fire before. We need to be aware that these trees are potentially damaged and could easily catch on fire and burn down. So we start looking up and looking for hollows and things like that. So once the fire runs up top, get inside that hollow and it'll start burning it out from the inside and weaken it. And look, they don't always fall down, but there's a fair chance they probably will. And sometimes you don't even know they're burning on the inside. All right, so that's we're starting to get a few cracks and things, and once it starts getting in those, and it'll be burning away, and the next thing you know, it's crashing down around you. All right, just a look at the one on the left. What can you tell me about the one on the left? It looks, remember, part of my earliest days of studying forestry was that, trees grow naturally, they're nice and round, that's what they're meant to do. Shouldn't have bumps and things on them. If you've got bumps and things, there's some sort of defect there. So what can you see about the one on the left there, where you actually can see where a branch is broken off, but you can see also, a bit of fungi in there already. That's off my block. So I know actually I was there about 2 days after it fell, so the fungi didn't get in there that quick. That fungi was already inside when that branch broke off. So it's starting to get defective. What's just above where the fungi is? The branch above it? Does it look nice and round? No, it's not. Okay, so that's a telltale sign. Once you see that, there's damage inside those trees. So trees should be nice and round. When you start to see bumps and hollows, it's there for a particular reason. So there's no such thing, in my view, as a natural defect in trees. Basically, it's there because it's been damaged in the past. So once you see a tree doesn't look nice and round, you can assume that it's been damaged. There's a fair chance it'll be defective on the inside. So you start looking for any hollows, any areas, any dry sides where the fire can get into it, and once it gets in, it'll start burning it out. And the same with the one on the right-hand side, where the hollow is there, you can see where it's like a natural swelling there, where it's been damaged before in the past, and there'll be fungi and stuff inside it as well. Again, when we're looking at the trees, we also look at what species, and the amount of gum on the right-hand side there, it's got a hollow up top. We have to then determine, well, particularly if it's a planned burn, can we keep it cool enough so it doesn't run all the way up the top? There mightn't be a lot of bark from top to bottom, so that may not actually catch on fire if we keep our back burn nice and cool. So it's about instructing our guys how to light properly so it doesn't catch on fire. With that same tree in stringy bark, you'd guarantee it's going to go straight into that hollow. So that's why species makes a difference. Sometimes we're doing the marking as well. We've got to determine, is the fire going to run up that tree and get into the hollow. And they don't always burn down. So not every tree burns down, and sometimes it catches on fire overnight. It's been perhaps a cooler fire, so even though the main fire might have been really hot, may have been burnt by the flank of the fire, not as hot, or may have been burnt overnight. So, or occasionally, as you all know, fires throw spot fires ahead of itself, and then this one might happen, the spot might land right next to a tree. And so when that spot fire first takes off, it burns so much cooler, so it less likely for that tree to catch on fire. But again, once you see that, sometimes we can get in and start putting out. Once we're driving past, doing patrolling, if we see a tree like that on fire, quick as we can, jump out and put it out. Don't keep driving up and down past it, because the longer it burns, the weaker it gets, and the more likely it's going to burn down. So really important with our patrolling crews, when they see stuff on fire in the early stages, get out and put it out. And that's just one where it has been weakened enough. You can see there's some new wood around the outside. That's what's been holding that tree up. It's been scarred, but then a lot of dead wood in the middle and a bit of green stuff around the outside where it's regrowing. And now for the next probably 20 years, we've got a lot of trees like that. They've only got that little bit of green wood around the outside, a lot of dead wood in the middle. Once it starts burning, it can actually weaken that bit of green wood on the outside enough to make it collapse and fall down. All right, look pretty docile, these little limbs up there, but coming from 30 metres up, I can assure you they're not very nice. I've had one fall on my head, and thank God I had a helmet on at the time. It wasn't a very big limb at all, probably about 6 foot long and probably an inch or so around, then come straight down and dong me. I was falling a tree, and it come down and dong me down the front of the helmet, and I've had a headache for 2 days out of it, and it was just a very small limb. I had it come down through my shoulder, probably would have come out top of my shoulder and probably popped out down the other side. So if it hit me across the back of the neck, probably would have speared through there, and probably I'd been dead before I know it. So when we start seeing these trees with dead limbs, once the fire starts running up there, they're going to catch on fire, burn off, and we really can start falling down quite quickly. So it's really important we don't get any crews underneath those at all. Again, stuff on sides of roads where we do so much of our work, and something that really important to think about. Often we drive up and down roads, there's trees on fire, yet we've actually got an open paddock right next to it. So once you start seeing any trees on fire at all, if you've got one tree on fire, there's a fair chance there's a lot more are going to catch on fire. So look for alternatives, because most of those trees they grow towards light. That's something eucalypts do quite well. They grow towards light, so they're going to lean back across the road. And when they catch on fire, the fair chance that's where they're going to fall across the road. So again, always looking for alternatives. I've seen, in fact, an incident I investigated once where there's a tree-lined road and the tankers were going up and down the whole time, but either side of that was actually open paddocks. And then where a tree fall down and hit a vehicle. So always thinking about, well, do we have to be underneath these trees? Can we find some open country we can be driving through and create a new road to actually get access? And again, I was mentioning earlier about night time. You just cannot see properly. Even though we've got some good strong torches these days, that's so difficult to see what's up top. So, and one tree might fall into another, and it's so dangerous. So again, just got to ask ourselves, if at nighttime operations, do we need to be anywhere near trees? We've got a lot of mopping up to do, and if those trees are not within 30, 40 metres of the control line, they're going to wait. They've got no problem at all till the morning. Let them go till the morning so we can see what's going on, till we get a machine in there to start treating them. We've got just too much risk going in there at night time. All right, I think my time's up. Thanks, Andy. So any questions?
great if you could hang around for an extra, however long the OM takes to finish the evening, and we're just going to have some questions for any of the people that have presented tonight. So if you've got an extra 20, much appreciated. Thanks, Les. Great information. We're getting serious about trees. We should be all working through one of the Chief's requirements, which was to go through the tree package. So the extra information tonight's excellent. So last but not least, the Ops Manager has the floor to give us a brief on expectations and probably an intro. So over to you, Operations Manager Bill Johnston.
That was yours, wasn't it?
Yes. Always a privilege to listen to Les speak. I think it would be fair to say he's probably forgotten more about the fire in a natural environment than most of us would remember. So inquisitive is Les, that legend has it that when he's at home on the block and just wondering, wonder what fire would do in this set of circumstances, it's not uncommon that Les will actually go and light that fire to see what happens. And then sit back and observe. And I think Les is not only a teacher and a practitioner, but an observer. And I think that's one of the things that make him truly one of the most respected men in his field. So enough about Les, it's about me now. I just want to talk to you tonight about a brief overview of my intent. So I'll give you, we'll talk about the Operations Manager's intent. I'd like to put some grassland curing in front of you so you can see what we're working with grassland curing, and you can actually get an appreciation of just how dry some parts of the state actually are. I want to talk to you about safety. I want to talk to you about preparedness with my twist on that. I want to talk to you about practice, or I'll say rehearsal, and how important I think that is to us. And then the need for review, that is to learn. So what you're looking at on the screen is Monday morning's grassland curing map for the state of Victoria. That's compiled in part by the Bureau of Meteorology and a network of volunteer observers around the state of Victoria who go out and actually do these observations over the weekend and feed them into the state. And from that, every Monday morning, the operations managers in each district go around and validate whether they believe those curing rates to be true or not. So the importance of the people on the ground is to validate what we're actually seeing from the satellite, because the satellite can only see it from one perspective, and that's from looking down, where the observer actually goes out and applies some theory and actually validates that. And so you get this interesting view. What's of note, you'll notice that nothing unusual this time of year in the far northwest. The countryside's curing fairly quickly. I believe, talking to old mate Bluey White up there, they had a 38-degree day last Saturday before, 45 to 50, and yep, some gusting to 80, and that pretty much paid an end to the harvest for a lot of those guys, because 2 days later they were followed up by some really healthy frosts. Who would be a farmer in the mallee, you might ask? So interestingly, the mallee's cured really quickly. What is really interesting to note, though, is is southwest and east Gippsland, just how dry it is down there. I believe fire restrictions come in next week down there, Scott, and already we are fighting fires down in East Gippsland, and having just come from down there, it is particularly dry. Unless you actually could see it, you wouldn't actually think, you'd think it was January, not October. And then there's our part of the world, which is starting to turn quite rapidly. I've been up and down the highway a few times over the last few weeks and months, and it's quite clear to me how quickly the northern aspects, the northern slopes, are actually drying. So I think we will start to, in fact we already are, seeing an increase in burns getting away. And so now what we'll start to see is the frequency of that increasing, and as the frequency increases, the size of those fires will actually start to increase as well as the fuel becomes more readily primed to burn. So we're not far away. And interestingly, in our minds, we talk about the fire danger period, and all our thinking is about that and the bad days. I'd ask you now to actually start thinking about the shoulder before the fire danger period. Because we get a day out of the box on the cusp of the fire danger period, and that's a day that causes me significant concern because we're not ready. We might have said we're ready, we've done all the testing and stuff, but we're not actually thinking about fire because we haven't dropped the hammer on the fire danger period. So I'll just leave you to ponder that, and while I do, talk to you about my intent. I'm going to try to keep this simple. So my view is that the intent is to deploy our operational capability in the safest, most timely and efficient manner in order to fulfil CFA's mission, to protect lives and property. That's pretty straightforward, would you agree? Yeah, lots of nods. And, here's the interesting bit, and that our operational decision making is consistent with the state emergency management priorities, or is underpinned by those priorities that Scott talked about before, and I'll show them to you. Because I think if we can get this part right, a lot of the other stuff will fall into place. Well, so, state emergency management priorities. Protection of life is paramount. No argument about that. The safety to ourselves and safety of community members, especially the vulnerable, and members and visitors and tourists who may be in our area and unfamiliar with the environment that they find themselves in. If I give you an example of that, any weekend on the Great Ocean Road, I think you would find hundreds, if not thousands of people who are in a very volatile environment who have no idea about the risks that they are confronted with. We've already talked about issuing of information. So the issuing of information to the community that is important about the incident that we are dealing with. It needs to be timely, relevant and tailored. And we've been hammering this on for some years now, timely, tailored and relevant information so that we can help the community make informed decisions about their safety. So one of the frustrations that I experience, Scott, RDO's experience, is we may post up a warning or an advice message that CFA or DELP are responding to a fire in an area. We'll draw a polygon around it and out it'll go. 6 hours later, that message still says that we're responding. And I'm thinking, geez, surely we've got there by now. So it's about the timeliness and the tailored and the relevant stuff. Because when it's outside the fire danger period, no one really is concerned about the messaging greatly, particularly in the wildland environment. But leave that message up for a few hours during the summer, and I guarantee you someone will be asking the question, are you there yet? What's going on? The protection of critical infrastructure and community assets that support community resilience. Now these are the three top things that we must do for me. So, protection of life, tell the community what's going on, and the protection of critical infrastructure. And having spent some time in the space, you'll start to hear that our systems are perhaps are vulnerable because of a whole reason of factors, hence why they're important. The protection of residential property as a place of primary residence. Okay, everyone gets that. A man's home is his castle. Assets supporting livelihoods, businesses, economic production, and the cultural and environmental values of things are also important to us. Safety first. Ironically, here's safety, the third item down the list, and it's one of my bugbears. We always talk about safety first, but it's never the first thing we talk about. But I'd like to put my slant on that if I could for you. So be ready, take an inventory. And what I mean by that is take a personal inventory. Take some personal account of your own situation. Take your gear out of the bag. It might not have been out of the bag since last summer. Shake it off. Might even, heaven forbid, find some nugget, put it on your boots. See what you need. Have you got everything? Do you have gloves? Do you have your goggles? Do you have your dust masks? Do you have all of those little things? Because they're no good to you if you're looking for them on the day. You need them before the day. Take an inventory of your mates. Make sure that they're ready, because you're relying on them, and in turn they're relying on you. Take an inventory of everything else, your equipment, your truck, all your gear. Take an inventory of your skills. Take an inventory. Take the time to reflect. Ask yourself the question, am I ready? Is the team ready? Have we all done what the Chief Office mandatory requirements are before this summer? Have we all done our burnover drill? Yes? Or we all will do our burnover drill. Have we all done the hazardous tree online package? Yep. It's not hard, is it? It's pretty straightforward. Yep. I think it's actually not a bad thing for awareness. It's we get some criticisms for many things, but I think we've done that pretty well. Situational awareness. I want to talk to you about situational awareness. Les has spoken about it. If you do the hazardous tree package, it'll be aware of it. But situational awareness is about knowing what's going on around you. And it's not always the bad days that are the ones that bite us. Because the bad days, we know are bad days. It's the days that aren't so bad. I think in the package it uses the term look up, look down, look around. That's part of it. But it's about knowing everything that's going on around you. Be in tune to the weather. Listen to the radio. Watch out. Listen for red flag warnings. We've done them. Practice them. Practice our Mayday calls and the Mayday drills, our burnover drills. We can do that. We can find a discrete channel somewhere. We can do that. And then when you've practiced it, review it. See if there's anywhere you could do it a little bit better, and then maybe practice it again. In preparedness and engagement, I'm asking that you be proactive. We talk about community engagement, community education and all the rest of it, but education begins with the engagement. That is a conversation between two people or a group of people talking about what is going on around them. So if you're out in your community, let them know. Have that engagement. If you're driving around and you see someone's got a pile of rubbish lined up and ready to burn, maybe you could stop and offer them some guidance. When we deploy you and we send you away, you might find yourself in a community doing something like asset protection. Important job, very important job. It's not exciting, it's not a sexy job, but it is an important job. Engage with the community, tell them what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because they may actually have some information for you that might be important. Because they might say, what are you doing that for, when really the thing that we care about is this over here. Oh, right, okay. I use the term, put your best foot forward. Do that every day. So, aspire to be the best we can be, doing the best job we can with what we've got. If I could use the analogy, if we can leave things in a better state than how we found them, that's a good outcome. So put your best foot forward. On the big days, put our best team on the ground. But it's not the big day, again, it's not the big day that concerns me, it's the other days. The big days are those days. But it's the lower end FDIs when we're perhaps dozing off a little, Saturday afternoon, a couple of beers, barbecue, whatnot. Yep. We could become a little bit complacent. Please don't. Capability is an interesting one. I'll ask that you, when we do our inventory, we also do that. What's our capability? Can we really do this? Have we got any gaps? Oh, our truck's on strike team. How can we sustain it if it goes away? Have we got a crew? Am I part of that crew? If I'm not part of that crew, am I prepared to go in case someone else can't? So it's about identifying the gaps, what your deficiencies are, and then taking some remedial action. And that can be as simple as just telling someone. If you can't fix it, source it locally, have a discussion, and we'll find a way. We will find a way. When I ask you to practice realistic scenarios or rehearse, do some worst case scenario thinking. I think it would be fair to say, for those that have been around this part of the world, and I'm having grown up around in this part of the world, the worst case scenario thinking for me isn't that hard. Many of you, I think, if you were around in 1983, have probably experienced it. And many of you probably have since. That risk, that hazard is still there. In fact, it's probably more complex now than it was then. So have a think about that worst case scenario stuff. What's the worst thing that can happen before, during and after the deployment? Practice our burnover drills. I'm going to bang on about that. Do our hazardous trees package. And there's plenty of scrub around, plenty of forest around you. I'm sure you could take a drive on any weekend, any Sunday afternoon, and with the days getting longer at any night, any evening, and actually go out and start to ask is that a hazardous tree? Is it not? And start the learning. Because I think the best part of the learning is actually being out there on the ground. Shoots, tactical exercises without troops. So it's about getting a piece of chalk, drawing a map on the floor, and then just running through it. What happens if? Fire starts here, wind's here, put resources here, got assets here. You don't need a lot to do that sort of stuff. Indeed, some of the most effective tutorials, when they're done without troops as a rehearsal to events, can have a significant impact on the successful outcome of those events. And they're easy, and we can help. We have some terrific people, wildfires instructors and operations officers, who can either facilitate a shoot for you or help you with your own shoot. And we can come up with the scenarios. We could make your hair curl, I can tell you that. I don't think we have to, though. I think you probably know. Analyse and review. I think this is one of the areas where we could improve significantly. We attend events. We do training nights, and we do that, and quite often we come back and we might even enjoy each other's company over a refreshing drink afterwards and tell the war stories, which is great. We learn. We learn through narrative. We learn through telling stories. I'd encourage us to do that, but do it in a critical way. Did we? Could we? How can we? And then, okay, How could we improve that? There's always improvement to be made, always. The question is, where does the improvement lie? And at the first instance, it lies right where it's born, where that conversation happens. Quite often, I see reviews that are done, and this would be better if you did this. Well, hang on a minute, I'm not there. I'll do my end of it, I'll do my part of it, but if you can identify it, you might actually be able to improve it yourself. And sometimes it doesn't take much. Implement the actions. And after you've implemented all your remedial stuff, rehearse it again and actually see if what you've put into place makes a positive difference. And then you might find that that was good. What if we did this? And then all of a sudden you're off on a journey of continuous improvement. The final things I really want to focus on is the people aspect of it. We will demand a lot. We do. And I quite often hear that the burden is so great that, you know, it is so great it's almost impossible to deal with. And so people show signs and exhibit stress and all those sorts of things. I'll catch this with you. No is not a foreign concept to us. In fact, I would argue that, and I reckon pretty successfully, that the first word that you get taught as a child is the word no. Would you agree? Okay. So why is it when someone comes to you with an unreal expectation about what you're going to do that you say yes? No. No is a perfectly reasonable response, as long as it's no because of. No, how about this? No, could we do something else? Well, okay, let's do that. So when we come to you with unrealistic demands, and we will, as you know, you might have to respectfully help me modify my expectations. I used respectfully, didn't I? I did, good. If you want to do it in another manner, then no problem, we'll go and have that conversation somewhere else. But you can only do what you can where you are with what you have. And that's okay. So the stresses and everything else that put on you, I'd say, let some of it go. Put your happiness before your work or your success for a change, and maybe a different mindset. So look after yourself first. Gentlemen, I'm talking to you now because you are the worst at it. Look after yourself. There's a whole network of people trying to look after you, but if you're not looking after yourself, you make it really hard for them. And trust me, I know, I've experienced that. Look after each other. This is one thing that, gentlemen, you are really good at, looking after your mates. But for everybody, look after each other. It is really important. We see and experience some of the most profound things that anyone would ever want to see or hear or do. And it's really important that we look after each other. And then we follow up. And if you're not doing so well, ask for help. And if you think someone isn't doing so well, you know what? Ask for help on their behalf. So that's really all I wanted to impart with you. Get ready. Be prepared. Don't be complacent. Don't dismiss the low-end fire danger days. If you think about it, Adam, if I'm right, PDD aircraft are airborne at an FDI of 12. 12. And if you were to look at a fire danger rating sign, where does that FDI sit in that sign. Low, fire danger low. So fire danger low, and we are putting aircraft in the air. So there's something there. And so when we drive past a sign and go fire danger low, go, and yet we're still putting aircraft up, perhaps it's not as low as you think. So don't be complacent about it. Practice, rehearse, practice again. Improve, review, do some tactical exercises. If you need some help, come to us. We can, I'm sure we can pull something together. And if you're not sure about anything, put your hand up and ask. And if you can't do something, then just say so. And we will find a way. We always have, and we will again. So that's about all I want to say. Some things I would like to do before I surrender the stage back to Andy and we take some questions. I'd like to thank the guys who put this night, created this opportunity tonight. I'd particularly like to thank the Red Cross for their catering and their logistical support. I think if we could show, sorry, Salvation Army, okay. I was going so well too. So, I'd like you to show your appreciation for that, please. I'd like to thank Michelle and Andy for putting the work in tonight. I'd also like to put out there that the district has come storming into the social media age with the launch of our district Facebook page. Anyway, we're there. I'd like to thank our speakers and presenters tonight. I've actually really enjoyed myself tonight. I've seen some familiar faces that I haven't seen for a long time tonight. I'm not going to display my hand publicly at this point about where my origins are, but they're not far from here. I'd like to also thank you guys for coming, because it's your attendance that makes this night a success, not us snoozers standing talking before you, it's you. And I hope we've got many, many people out there that we're streaming to, and I hope that they have got something out of the night. And that's really all I wanted to say in essence. But look after yourselves, look after your mates, and please, please stay safe. Thank you, everybody. Andy.
Thanks, Bill. The final component of the night was whether or not we had any questions from the field. So I'd be disappointed if we didn't get one from the Goldfields group, who instigated the live streaming. So Michelle, how are we going for any questions via the internet? Or first, for anyone in the room, any questions for any of the presenters tonight?
Andy, I'll start with a couple from the live stream. So from Marcus, he wants to ask a couple of questions. One for the warnings and advice team, so Beth and Greg. If we forget the direction of travel in the SITREP, can that info be gained from the Bureau of Meteorology? So, you know, if it is a screaming northwesterly wind, you guys will pick that up?
On behalf of the warnings team, it's more about so that the people that are going to receive the warning, it's more about where the fire's headed. So it's heading for the community of Kyneton, or it's headed towards the intersection of Vince, whereabouts, somewhere in Benlock's area. So the practicalities, you know, timely relevant as Bill spoke about. It's more about the practicalities of understanding the warning.
Thank you. Another question from Marcus was, for Adam, what PDD aircraft is coming out of Bacchus Marsh?
It hasn't been decided yet, so it'll be a Type 2 medium helicopter, but the exact make and model are still being worked through.
Thank you. And one from, sorry, I've just got to go back up in my question feed. From Tom Morley, a question for Les. Brigade captains have been asked to endorse tree assessors. How does DELP train and endorse their hazardous tree assessors?
We're just finalising a package at the moment, but mainly we're looking at the guys who have got bush experience that are currently accredited as fallers or have worked in sort of forest type environments, but that's been what we've used up until now. But each of those will need to go through a small training package for identifying different trees and different hazards, and then they'll be accredited as tree markers. So the main thing is anybody can do that, provided they've got some practical background, worked in the bush a bit, and that training package is probably available to anybody. But if you're on a fire ground and you haven't got people there that are qualified, sing out very quickly and just put a resource request in, and if there's no one in CFA, DELP or Forest Fire Management Victoria will try and assist as quick as we can.
Thanks, Les. And I just want to highlight as well, when Scott mentioned response to recovery, it's one of the key things. One of the tree stuff is so important, and it's something that we can act on really quickly too. So that resource request system gets actioned quite quickly in regards to tree assessment and tree treatment. That's it from our live stream crew. Into the crowd, Andy Chapman.
For Adam, in regards to LATs, we seem to have a bit of difficulty sorting out the LATs, getting trucks off the fire line, getting trucks back onto the fire line, and it's the time frame around LATs that's the problem. Can we be educated a little bit more on what it takes to set up an attack with LATs and to be able to get back onto the fire ground?
Yeah, look, I would agree with that. I think the LATs is a work in progress from how do we better integrate them into our operations on the ground. Being a relatively new, I suppose, asset type for utilisation in Australia, there's a lot of work being done in that space to work out the best way, because the LATs don't just impact ground crew, they actually impact their operations as well. So we do spend a lot of time moving aircraft and ground resources out of the way to accommodate a LAT drop. I think a lot of it is how we plan going forward, how we're going to use those LAT drops. Like, are we going to use them strategically, or are we going to use them in a direct attack mode? And I think our knowledge collectively is growing rapidly season by season as we use them. But I suppose in more remote areas, it's a lot more easier to lay those lines with LATs than it is in a more congested and built-up environment. So I do agree there is work to be done, and it will continue to evolve, and the training will improve. How about we do all my questions now?
Two questions for Adam before he sits down. When do the PDD look like to start out of Bendigo?
I can't answer that one, Hayden, but what I can say is that the Chiefs have started meeting weekly. So there's a weekly meeting on a Tuesday, which looks at activations for the following Wednesday. So the first 4 aircraft have been activated this week for next week, which are starting in Gippsland based on the current conditions down there. And that'll be assessed on a weekly basis from now on, right up until the last aircraft's on. But, looking at the grassland curing that Bill put up and the season, I think we're going to see a lot of early starts going forward.
It's probably one for Scott too, based in the regional field. So you got any further info on?
Yeah, so we're looking to start the bombers out of Oyun. The Rotary out of Sea Lake this month. So fire danger period looking around the 23rd, so about that time frame for aircraft up in the Mallee. That'll cascade down to Boort and then ultimately cascade down to us also at Bendigo, probably December, I guess, at the moment. But as Adam said, there's a weekly process that goes on with the state, and obviously we inform that process about the environment and the change in the risk environment that goes around. So we're a major contributor to that decision-making process, certainly from the regional perspective. So that's roughly the time frames. And then the national fleet is put on ultimately by the state decision. So things like the LATs and the air cranes and things will be done as strategic aircraft, and those decisions are very much made at the state level and not always just in isolation of Victoria as well. So it'll depend on where New South Wales is at and where South Australia is at as to when some of those aircraft lob here.
All right. Sorry, my second question is, when the State Air Desk decides to move an aircraft to a larger job, so say 335 goes out of Bendigo, does the State Air Desk then notify the RDO? And then why isn't it then moved across to the rest of the district to know where the aircraft's gone?
Yeah, so there's not too many people that can actually redeploy aircraft. So obviously the state can. Regions are often consulted about the movement of, just like we can request additional aircraft be moved in if we've got an elevated risk. So in a pure sense, it should be a model where we move our capability to treat the risk environment. If it's a particular part of the state that's seeing that risk, it makes common sense to pick up those assets and move to it. So ultimately, the state response controllers got the ultimate power to do so, but it is a two-way process between particularly the regions and the state to move that capability around. PDD is not to a level of maturity yet that we can do like move-ups like we do with fire trucks in fire stations. So that's not probably there in what I'll call version 1 of PDD. So if the machine out of Mangalore gets moved over to a job somewhere else and another machine does go to Mangalore, it doesn't necessarily mean that replacement machine will be on PDD. So there's some maturity in that process. But we should treat them as flexible mobile tools because they are, and maximise that. Sometimes it'll work for us, sometimes it'll work against us. A simple way of thinking about it, if you have to have a fire today, have the first one because they're probably all available.
We also have a good relationship with the air attack supervisors, so they've got a mobile phone and they'll often come up and say, hey, listen, just let you know, one of the units is either offline or been shifted somewhere else.
And I think the other thing too is that aircraft are available 365 days a year. So yeah, you might not have your PDD automated machine, but if you still need that aircraft support right now, you need it tomorrow, you make the call, through VicFire to the RDO, and the state will get you an aircraft. It might be 30, 60 minutes, but you will get one. So that's the other thing to take home. You're not necessarily reliant on the automated process. You can make manual requests.
Down the front here.
Yeah, that also almost answered my question. FDIs, and when it comes down to your borderlines of districts, as in from District 2 to also Region 15, going back to the later part of last year, or the later part of the fire season last year, was a fire right next to Mount Franklin. Wind was coming in from the south and it was blowing fairly heavily from the south. Now, Franklin Ford Captain requested for aircraft since the fire was heading over towards Guildford in a fairly big hurry. The fire control, which probably would have been coming out of Region 15, said that the FDI was too low and the aircraft wasn't going to go up. Well, he actually screamed and he begged and he finally got it. But by then the fire was well on its way where it was going.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can have models and we can have thresholds and we have risk matrix and we have readiness matrix. We've got more doctrine than you can poke a stick at that says if X happens, you should do Y. But at the end of the day, we're trying to, it's a state of readiness, it's a state of preparedness, it should be used as a guide. There's nothing better than having it validated on the ground. That's what it comes down to, and we should always take that advice from the field. I don't want to comment specifically, I don't have any knowledge of that particular job, And on that, you know, I am a little bit critical of where we've got to with technology and the automation of our systems to say, I call it the Google machine. It spits out a number, and that number says we should do A, B and C, and we don't really think beyond that. And I would encourage that everyone, you know, what does this mean, and does that relate to what I'm seeing and what I'm experiencing, and actually think a bit deeper than the weather says it's an FDI of 25 and that means X. What does that really mean in your patch? You know, what's your experience? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And what does that really mean for us, as opposed to that check sheet on the wall says we only need to do A, B and C.
The RDOs in 2 will generally keep a pretty close eye on that trigger point. So generally there'll be people in the room that would have received calls from the RDOs when they're responding to a fire, and the call will be, hey, just let you know you're under trigger, so you need to let me know or let VicFire know if you want the aircraft. So as a collective, the RDOs in District 2 are generally pretty consistent on that. So we'll ring up and say, just let you know it's not going to lift off because the trigger's not there. If you want it, you have to ask for it.
Yeah, I think the trigger actually must have eventually came in at Ballarat. But at region 15, it was actually denying it from lifting. Until Franklin Pool Captain got, you know, to the other side.
Can I just jump in with another point? There's a lot of conversation, and there always is an interest around aircraft and aviation, and they're an awesome tool. Absolutely got a role to play. Over the years, though, an observation is that it has started to change and impact the way our ground crews battle fires or attack fires or attempt to control fires from the traditional sense. And there's plenty of examples over recent years of crews sitting back, watching and awaiting and letting the big machines do what they do, and probably not being as effective as we can. So there is, as we've got more and more aircraft into the fleet, there's a greater reliance on those machines attending. We all know what they can do, but I'd hate to see us fall into a place of complacency and with an expectation that they will be there, because they won't be there every time. And there's been some significant fires in Victoria in the last couple of years where we can pinpoint at early stages of fire there was an assumption made that these machines will be here and that will fix that for us and we'll just wait here and let it happen, and they never arrived. Because as what's happening at the moment, Gippsland's got all sorts of issues going on. If they've got issues in October, they're probably going to have issues for a while yet, and if we're in campaign mode, all the PDD plans and everything else in the world are fantastic, but if the machine's not there, it's not there. So don't just assume and expect it to be there. Still carry on your operational planning, your tactics, with the assumption that if they come, it's a bonus.
Anyone else? Darren wants to go home. Okay, so if there's no further questions, safe travels and good luck with the rest of your preparedness. So thanks everyone for attending.
Well done, Ian.
Yeah, that's good. Well done. That's good. I love that chat.